Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some really fascinating sources you all have sent in.
Yeah, it's quite a collection.
We've got some YouTube videos about the Tower of Babel
Uh-huh.
and even Babylon itself,
Okay.
some excerpts from the Book of Daniel, and even a podcast snippet about the Mark of the Beast.
Interesting.
So I'm kind of a mix of ancient and modern here.
It is a pretty diverse collection.
It is, yeah.
Where do we even begin with all this material?
Well, our mission today is to unearth those connections,
Okay.
hidden connections between these sources.
Okay, like those historical treasure hunters.
Yeah, exactly.
Except we're digging for insights.
We're not going for gold here.
Right.
We're going for those kind of deeper meanings.
I like that analogy.
So one of the YouTube videos,
Uh-huh.
the one called Chuck Missler, Genesis Session 14, Chapter 11, The Tower of Babel,
Okay.
dives into that Tower of Babel story from the Book of Genesis.
Right, the one where humanity tries to build a tower to heaven.
Yeah, and things don't go quite according to plan.
Uh-huh.
Now, what's interesting is this video argues that the people building the tower weren't just naive.
Right.
They weren't just trying to, literally climb to heaven.
Uh-huh.
Instead, it presents this tower as a symbol of human ambition
Okay.
and that age-old desire to kind of push the limits of what's possible.
Yeah, it even suggests that those ancient civilizations might have been more intellectually advanced
Oh, really?
than we give them credit for.
So more advanced than we think.
Possibly. Imagine the accumulated knowledge and wisdom
Right.
passed down over generations.
Over centuries, potentially.
The video even mentions how lifespans were significantly longer back then, which means individuals had more time to learn to develop really sophisticated systems of knowledge.
That makes you wonder what we could achieve with such extended lifespans.
Yeah.
I mean, would our scientific and technological advancements skyrocket?
Yeah, or we just find new and more elaborate ways to kind of mess things up.
Right? Are we just human and we're going to find new ways to mess things up no matter what?
That's the question, isn't it? I think this raises a fundamental point about human nature. Is ambition inherently a good thing?
Okay.
Or does it always contain kind of the seeds of our own downfall?
Yeah. Where do we draw the line between healthy ambition
Uh-huh.
and hubris?
That's a good question.
Are there limits to what we should aspire to?
Yeah, especially when it comes to, manipulating the natural world.
Right.
The video seems to imply that there are limits.
Okay.
It suggests that the Tower of Babel serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that our ambitions should be guided by wisdom
Okay.
and a sense of humility.
Not getting too big for our britches.
Right. It's like they were reaching for something
Okay.
beyond their grasp,
Okay.
beyond what they were meant to achieve.
So maybe that's the key takeaway here.
Maybe.
That there are limits to human ambition
Uh-huh.
and that we shouldn't try to play God, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a valid interpretation.
Okay.
Especially when we consider the consequences of their actions in the story.
Right.
Their attempt to reach heaven resulted in division and confusion, ultimately the scattering of humanity.
Yeah, it's almost like they were trying to build a tower to unity,
Okay.
but instead they created a world of fragmentation.
Precisely. And that theme of fragmentation and division seems to resonate throughout history, even into our modern world.
So we see it today.
We do. We see it in political polarization, in cultural clashes, even in the breakdown of communication within families and communities.
Yeah, it's like that saying, divided we fall.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about Babylon itself? I mean, the videos don't just focus on the tower.
Right.
They also delve into the symbolism of the city itself, portraying it as a source of corruption and false gods.
Yeah, Babylon plays a significant role throughout the Bible, often representing worldliness and opposition to God.
Yeah, okay.
Remember, it was the center of a powerful empire that often clashed with the Israelites and their beliefs.
In one of the videos that Chuck Missler, Genesis Session 14, Chapter 11, The Tower of Babel, one even draws a parallel between ancient Babylon and the modern world.
Interesting.
It mentions how Babylon is being rebuilt in present-day Iraq, which some interpret as a fulfillment of biblical prophecies.
Yeah, the video touches upon prophecies found in the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah that predict the ultimate destruction of Babylon. And it's interesting how this concept of Babylon has transcended time and continues to hold symbolic significance.
So it still means something today.
It does, for many people today.
Makes you wonder if those ancient stories are still relevant today.
That's the beauty of these ancient texts. Their ability to speak to us across centuries and cultures.
Okay.
These themes of ambition, temptation, and the consequences of our choices are timeless and universal.
Okay, but let's shift gears for a moment and talk about those Book of Daniel excerpts. We see Daniel and his friends kind of navigating the challenges of living as exiles in Babylon.
Yeah, a culture vastly different from their own.
A culture that is vastly different.
They're pressured to conform, to abandon their beliefs.
And yet Daniel manages to not only survive, but thrive.
He does.
In this foreign environment.
Right.
He remains true to his faith, even when it means risking his life.
And it's not like he just blends into the background.
He doesn't just blend in.
No, he becomes renowned for his wisdom and understanding.
He really makes a name for himself.
He does. The book of Daniel even tells us that he surpassed the Babylonian wise men and astrologers.
Really? Wow, so he's kind of top dog.
He is. What's fascinating here is that Daniel's story seems to offer a different perspective on Babylon than the YouTube videos present.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's not just a place of corruption and evil.
Right.
It's also a place where faith can flourish.
Okay.
Where wisdom and integrity can be recognized and rewarded.
So maybe it's not so black and white.
Perhaps.
Maybe Babylon, both the ancient city and the concept it represents, is more complex than just like a symbol of evil.
Perhaps Daniel's story suggests that individuals can make choices about how they engage with the world around them, regardless of the dominant culture. He chose to maintain his faith and identity.
Right.
And in doing so, he achieved a level of success that even the Babylonians admired.
It's almost like he found a way to be in the world, but not of it.
Yes. He didn't completely isolate himself from Babylonian culture, but he also didn't compromise his core beliefs.
That's a really insightful observation.
I think Daniel's story offers a model for how we can navigate the complexities of living in a pluralistic society.
Okay, so how do we do that today?
We can engage with different cultures, learn from them, even appreciate their beauty and wisdom, without losing sight of our own values and beliefs.
So maybe it's not about rejecting everything from the outside world, but about being discerning, about making choices that are consistent with our faith and our conscience.
That seems to be a recurring theme in these sources. The choices we make have consequences, and those choices ultimately shape who we become and the impact we have on the world around us.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating tension between these two views of Babylon.
Yes.
One as a source of corruption, and the other as a place where faith can thrive even in exile.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle with two seemingly opposite pieces that somehow fit together.
They fit together somehow.
I agree. And perhaps that's the first clue in our treasure hunt.
Okay, so clue number one.
Maybe the key to understanding these sources lies not in choosing one perspective over the other, but in finding a way to hold both in tension, to see the complexities and nuances of these ancient stories and their relevance for our own lives.
I like that. It's not about finding a simple answer.
No.
It's about embracing the mystery, the unanswered questions, and the ongoing search for truth.
And that search for truth often leads us down unexpected paths. Which brings us to that podcast clip you mentioned.
Yeah.
The one about the mark of the beast.
Right. That clip is from episode 28 of the Ask Uncle Yashua podcast. And it takes a really interesting approach to this whole mark of the beast concept.
Something that's both fascinated and terrified people for centuries.
Yeah, right?
Well, the host actually argues against literal interpretation.
Oh, really?
Of the mark. He says it's not about a physical symbol or a technological implant, but rather about something much deeper, a spiritual choice.
So what is it about?
He says the real mark of the beast is choosing to embrace sin and turn away from God.
It's about that internal choice.
Yes. He even connects this to stories from the Old Testament. Like the Israelites craving meat in the wilderness. He says they chose immediate gratification over obedience to God. And their rebellion had disastrous consequences.
So is he saying that the mark of the beast isn't something forced upon us? But rather a choice we make?
That seems to be his point. He's emphasizing this internal struggle we all face between good and evil, between following our own selfish desires
Yeah.
and choosing to align ourselves with God's will.
So the battle isn't just out there in the world. It's
Right.
within each of us.
Exactly.
It's about the choices we make every day, the small compromises we make, the temptations we give in to.
Perhaps those small choices, those seemingly insignificant compromises, are ultimately what determine whether we bear the mark of the beast or the mark of God.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is.
That the real danger isn't some external force,
Right.
but the darkness that can reside within our own hearts.
But it's also a hopeful message.
Oh, how so?
Because if the mark of the beast is ultimately a choice, then we also have the power to choose differently. We can choose to resist temptation, to turn away from sin, and to align our hearts with God's will.
So it's not about living in fear of some future event, but about making the right choices today in this moment.
Precisely. And those choices, those daily acts of obedience, are what ultimately shape our character and determine our eternal destiny.
Okay, so we've gone from a tower that represents humanity's ambition to a mark that symbolizes our internal struggle with sin.
Yes.
Where do we go from here?
Well, the podcast host actually takes this idea of spiritual choice and applies it to some surprising examples from modern culture.
Like what?
Hip-hop music and Disney-themed weddings.
Wait, what? How do hip-hop and Disney weddings fit into all of this?
He uses them to illustrate how even seemingly innocuous cultural expressions can sometimes carry subtle messages that conflict with biblical values.
So it's not about condemning hip-hop or Disney outright. It's about being discerning, about recognizing the messages being conveyed and making conscious choices about what we allow to influence us.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to be critical consumers of culture. Not just passively absorbing whatever's being thrown at us.
Right.
But actively evaluating it through the lens of our faith.
So we need to be aware of how culture can subtly shape our values and beliefs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Even without us realizing it.
Yeah, it's easy to just kind of absorb things without thinking about them.
It is. And he's not advocating for a complete withdrawal from culture. But rather for a discerning engagement with it.
Okay, so we can still enjoy things.
We can. We can enjoy aspects of culture, but we should also be aware of the messages they're conveying.
Right.
And how those messages might align with or conflict with our own beliefs.
That makes sense. It's about being thoughtful and intentional about the cultural influences we allow into our lives.
And that takes us to another intriguing YouTube video in your collection. Titled, All Religions Come from Babylon. This one delves into the idea of cultural and religious influences that have shaped history. Even those that have touched Christianity itself.
This one's a bit controversial, isn't it?
It is.
It claims that a lot of religious practices and symbols can be traced back to ancient Babylon.
Including some elements of Christianity.
And even suggests that the Catholic Church intentionally created Islam to stop the spread of true Christianity.
Yeah. That's a pretty contentious claim.
Yeah, it is. And it's important to note that these claims are highly disputed.
Yes, they are.
And not universally accepted within scholarly circles.
But regardless of whether we agree with every detail, it's still fascinating to consider the historical interplay between different cultures and belief systems.
Yeah, how they kind of bounce off each other.
Exactly. This video highlights the complexity of religious history and how beliefs and practices have migrated and evolved across cultures and continents.
It's complicated.
It is. It reminds us that things are rarely as simple as they seem. And that there's always more to learn and explore.
So maybe it's not about accepting everything the video claims as absolute truth, but about using it as a springboard for further investigation.
I think that's a healthy approach. It's about being open to different perspectives, even challenging ones. And using them to deepen our own understanding of history, culture, and faith.
Makes you wonder about those hidden connections.
Yeah.
The threads of influence that have woven their way through history, shaping the world we live in today.
And that brings us to another YouTube video. Genesis 9:11, Noah and Sons, the Tower of Babel. Which also touches on the idea of cultural defiance against God. This one seems to draw a parallel between the Tower of Babel story and what it sees as a growing rejection of traditional religious values in modern society.
Like what kind of things?
Well, it points to things like the redefinition of marriage and the Sparkle Creed.
The Sparkle Creed?
That's a rewritten version of the Apostles' Creed that embraces LGBTQ plus identities.
Okay.
As evidence of a shift away from biblical principles.
So it's presenting a particular viewpoint.
Yes, it is.
One that sees these cultural changes as a form of rebellion against God's will.
Right. And while that perspective might resonate with some viewers, it's important to acknowledge that there are diverse viewpoints within Christianity on these issues.
Yeah. Not all Christians would agree with that.
Exactly. Not all Christians interpret these cultural shifts in the same way.
Right.
Some see them as positive developments, while others view them with concern.
So a variety of different opinions.
Exactly. And it's important for us as viewers and listeners to engage with these topics thoughtfully and to form our own conclusions based on our understanding of Scripture and our personal convictions.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating mix of sources.
They do.
Each offering a different perspective on these themes of human ambition, cultural influence, and the choices we make.
It's like we're starting to piece together a puzzle.
Okay.
But some of the pieces are still missing.
Right. And maybe that's the point.
Maybe it is. Maybe this deep dive isn't about finding all the answers.
Okay.
But about asking the right questions. About exploring the complexities and nuances of these ancient and modern sources.
Right.
And about discovering how they might speak to our own lives and challenges.
I like that.
Right.
It's about embracing the mystery, the unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And that ongoing search for truth.
And that search often leads us down unexpected paths.
Oh, boy.
We've explored the Tower of Babel, the symbolism of Babylon, and Daniel's journey of faith and exile.
Right.
But what about those specific excerpts from the book of Daniel?
Oh, yeah.
That you mentioned.
Yeah.
What insights can we glean from them?
Well, let's delve into those details.
Okay.
They offer a fascinating glimpse into Daniel's character and his ability to kind of navigate those complexities of living in a foreign culture.
Yeah, walking that tightrope between assimilation and maintaining his own identity.
Right. How did he do it?
Sounds like we're about to uncover some more hidden treasures in this deep dive.
Let's see what we can find.
So we're diving deeper into those Book of Daniel excerpts you selected.
Yeah.
Where do we begin?
Well, one of the excerpts comes from Daniel chapter 1.
Okay.
It tells that story of Daniel and his friends refusing to eat the king's food.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a pretty bold move back then.
Yeah, I remember this story. They requested to eat pulse and drink water instead.
Right.
But it was seen as a test of their loyalty to the Babylonian king.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is after 10 days of this pulse and water diet, they actually appeared healthier and stronger than the young men who had eaten the king's rich food.
It's almost like their commitment to their beliefs,
their
willingness to stand apart even in something as simple as food, somehow contributed to their well-being.
And it's not just about physical health.
Right.
The text also says that God gave them knowledge and skill in all kinds of learning and wisdom. In fact, it says they became 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers in the entire Babylonian kingdom.
Wow, 10 times better. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It challenges the idea that staying true to one's beliefs limits your potential for success. In Daniel's case, it seems like his faithfulness was actually a key to his success.
It almost makes you wonder if there's a connection between living a life of integrity and achieving excellence.
That's a thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
It suggests that being true to yourself, to your values, can actually enhance your abilities and open doors that might otherwise remain closed.
So it's not about rejecting everything from the dominant culture. It's about finding a way to integrate into society without compromising your core beliefs.
Exactly. Daniel and his friends found a way to embrace the intellectual opportunities of Babylon while remaining true to their dietary restrictions.
Right. It's a delicate balance, but their story shows that it's possible.
A valuable lesson for anyone kind of navigating a multicultural world.
Absolutely. Especially in today's increasingly diverse and interconnected society.
Okay, but the excerpts don't stop there.
Right.
We also have a section from Daniel chapter 11.
Okay.
Which is a completely different beast altogether.
Yes, Daniel chapter 11. It's packed with prophecies about wars, political intrigue, and the rise and fall of empires.
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming.
It can be.
To try and decipher all the details.
It's like trying to follow a complex political thriller with a cast of thousands.
Right. But amidst all those historical details, there seems to be a recurring theme.
Okay, what's that?
This idea that worldly power is fleeting. And ultimately God is in control.
So even amidst all the chaos and upheaval, there's a sense of order, a higher purpose unfolding behind the scenes.
Right, like it's all part of a bigger plan.
That seems to be a common interpretation of those prophecies.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful empires eventually crumble, and that history is ultimately moving towards a greater purpose, a divine plan.
Okay, but are there any specific details in those prophecies that stand out to you?
Well, one phrase that always intrigues me is the abomination that causes desolation.
Okay, the abomination that causes desolation.
It's mentioned a few times in Daniel.
Okay.
And it's been the subject of much debate and interpretation throughout history.
So what does it even mean?
Well, some scholars believe it refers to a specific historical event.
Okay.
Like the desecration of the Jewish temple by Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC.
Okay.
Others see it as a more general symbol of spiritual corruption and apostasy, a turning away from God and his ways.
So it's open to interpretation, but the core message seems to be a warning against spiritual compromise and the dangers of abandoning our faith.
Exactly. And that ties back nicely to what we were discussing earlier about the mark of the beast. Both the abomination that causes desolation and the mark of the beast can be seen as symbols of rebellion against God, of choosing to embrace darkness rather than light.
It's almost like a cautionary tale.
It is.
About the consequences of straying from God's path. Of allowing ourselves to be seduced by the allure of worldly power and influence.
I think that's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
It reminds us that our choices have eternal consequences and that we need to be vigilant about guarding our hearts against temptation and compromise.
Okay, so we've got these two contrasting views of Babylon.
Yes.
A place of corruption and evil.
Right.
But also a place where Daniel thrives because of his faithfulness.
Exactly.
And we've got these prophecies that seem to warn against the dangers of straying from God's path.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But it's fascinating how these seemingly disparate pieces are starting to fit together.
I know. And it makes you think about Daniel himself.
Okay.
He's portrayed as this wise and righteous man. But he's also deeply embedded in the Babylonian system.
Right.
He serves in high positions.
He does.
Advises kings, interprets dreams.
Right.
How did he manage to maintain his integrity in such a challenging environment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
His story seems to suggest that it is possible to engage with worldly systems without being corrupted by them. But it takes a certain level of intentionality, a steadfast commitment to one's values, and a willingness to seek God's guidance in every situation.
So he found a way to be in the world, but not of it.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message.
It is.
Especially for those of us who feel torn between our faith and the demands of our careers, our social circles, or the culture at large.
It's a reminder that we can be both faithful and successful.
We can.
We don't have to choose between our spiritual lives and our worldly aspirations.
So how did Daniel manage to maintain his integrity in such a challenging environment?
Yeah, how did he do it?
Well, I think his unwavering faith played a crucial role.
Okay, his faith.
Throughout his life, he consistently sought God's guidance and trusted in his protection, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
He also seems to have possessed a deep understanding of Babylonian culture.
Yes, absolutely. He didn't shy away from learning about the world around him. In fact, he embraced it.
Okay.
Using his knowledge and wisdom to navigate the complexities of Babylonian society while remaining true to his own beliefs.
So it's about being informed and discerning.
Precisely. About engaging with the world around us while also staying true to our own values.
Daniel's story teaches us that we can participate in the world in a meaningful way without being consumed by it.
We can be both wise and faithful.
Right.
Both successful and righteous.
That's a powerful message, and one that I think speaks to many of us who are trying to find our own way.
In a world that often seems to pull us in so many different directions.
It does. And it reminds us that we're not alone in that struggle.
Okay.
Daniel faced similar challenges centuries ago.
Right.
And his story offers us a timeless example of how to live with integrity and purpose in a world that often tries to pull us off course.
Okay, so we've explored these fascinating details from the book of Daniel.
Yes.
And it feels like we're starting to uncover some of the deeper themes that connect these sources together.
I agree. But remember, we're not just exploring these ancient texts for their historical value.
Right.
We're trying to understand how they might speak to our own lives, our own challenges,
Right.
and our own search for truth in a complex world.
So how do we bridge that gap
Yeah.
between ancient stories and modern life?
That's a great question. And perhaps that's where the real treasure lies.
Okay.
Let's shift our focus now and explore how the teachings of Jesus, particularly from the Gospel of Luke,
connect to the themes we've been uncovering.
I like that. Because ultimately our goal is to understand how these sources can illuminate our understanding of faith, culture, and the choices we make in the world today.
Exactly. And the teachings of Jesus offer a powerful lens through which we can view these ancient stories and discover their timeless relevance for our own lives.
Okay, I'm ready to explore those connections. Where do we begin?
Well, the Gospel of Luke is filled with teachings that challenge the worldly values of power, prestige, and self-promotion.
Okay.
Remember, Jesus lived in a culture that was heavily influenced by the Roman Empire, a culture that emphasized might, wealth, and social status.
Right, and Jesus' message was radically different.
It was. He preached a message of humility, service, and love for one's neighbor.
It was a countercultural message.
It was.
That challenged the assumptions and values of his day.
Exactly. And those teachings are just as relevant today as they were back then.
So we can still learn from them.
Absolutely. We live in a world that often glorifies ambition, success, and the pursuit of material wealth.
Yeah, it's all about getting ahead.
It is. But Jesus calls us to a different path.
Okay.
A path of humility, service, and compassion.
One passage that comes to mind is Luke 14:7-11.
Okay.
Where Jesus talks about choosing the lowest seat at a banquet.
Oh, yeah.
He says, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted."
That's a powerful teaching.
It is.
And it directly contrasts with the prideful ambition of the people who built the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
They were trying to make a name for themselves, to reach for greatness through their own efforts.
Right.
But Jesus teaches that true greatness lies in humility.
Okay.
In putting others before ourselves.
It's like a complete reversal of the world's values.
It's
about recognizing that we are not the center of the universe.
Right.
That true fulfillment comes not from self-promotion, but from serving others.
And that willingness to put others before ourselves is ultimately what reflects the character of God. Remember, Jesus himself said, "I am among you as the one who serves."
So it's not about building towers to reach heaven, but about building bridges to connect with those around us.
Yes.
To offer compassion, support, and love.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's a message that resonates throughout the Gospel of Luke.
Okay, so we've got this theme of humility versus ambition, and we've touched upon the idea of serving others.
Right.
Are there any other teachings in Luke that stand out to you?
Well, another relevant passage is the parable of the rich fool.
Okay, the rich fool.
Found in Luke 12:13-21.
Okay.
It's a story about a man who focuses on accumulating wealth and possessions.
Right.
Neglecting his spiritual well-being.
Oh, I remember that parable.
You do?
He builds bigger barns to store all his grain, thinking he's set for life.
Yeah. And then God says to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?"
Right. He loses it all.
Exactly. The parable highlights the emptiness of material pursuits and the danger of prioritizing earthly treasures over spiritual riches. It's a warning against greed, materialism, and the illusion that security can be found in possessions.
It's almost like a commentary on the seductive allure of Babylon.
Okay.
The temptation to get caught up in the pursuit of wealth, power, and status.
Right.
And to forget what truly matters.
That's a great connection. And it reminds us that true security, true fulfillment, can only be found in God.
Okay.
Jesus reminds us that our lives are not about what we accumulate, but about who we become and the impact we have on the world around us.
So it's about shifting our focus from material wealth to spiritual riches.
Yes.
From building bigger barns to cultivating a heart that is rich in love, compassion, and generosity.
Exactly. And that's a radical message.
It is.
Especially in a world that often bombards us with messages of consumerism, self-gratification, and the pursuit of material success.
It's a call to resist the allure of the Babylonian mindset. Yes.
To reject the idea that happiness can be found in acquiring more things.
Right.
And to focus instead on cultivating a life of meaning, purpose, and connection with something greater than ourselves.
I think that's a really insightful way to connect those teachings.
Yeah.
with the broader themes we've been exploring.
Okay, so we've got these contrasting values.
Uh-huh.
Humility versus ambition.
Yes.
Service versus self-promotion.
Uh-huh.
Spiritual riches versus material wealth.
It's like a tug of war between two opposing forces.
It is.
And we're caught in the middle trying to figure out which side to pull for.
That's a great analogy. And I think that's where discernment comes in.
Discernment.
Jesus calls us to be discerning.
He does.
To recognize those false promises of the world and to choose a different path.
Mm-hmm.
A path that leads to true life, true fulfillment,
right,
and true connection with God.
So it's not about rejecting everything from the world. It's about being thoughtful about evaluating the messages we're receiving.
And about making choices that align with our faith and our values. Precisely.
Mm.
And those choices, those acts of discernment, ultimately shape who we become and the impact we have on the world around us.
Okay. But how do we develop that discernment?
Yeah, how do we do it?
How do we know which path to choose,
Uh-huh.
which voices to listen to,
Right.
which influences to embrace?
That's a crucial question. And I think it's something we'll explore further.
Okay.
As we delve into another intriguing passage from Luke.
Okay.
The one about praying to be worthy to escape
Uh-huh.
the things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man.
Oh, yes. That passage from Luke 21.36.
You remember it?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, and it definitely piqued my curiosity.
Good.
What's the context for that teaching?
Well, Jesus is speaking about the end times.
Okay.
The period of tribulation that will precede his return.
So these are tough times.
Yes. He's warning his disciples about the signs of the times
Uh-huh.
and the need to be watchful and prepared.
So it's a message of urgency.
It is.
A call to be ready for the challenges and trials that lie ahead.
Exactly. And he encourages them to pray for the strength to endure those difficult times, to pray that they may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man.
Okay, but what does it mean to escape all these things? Is he talking about a physical escape, like being miraculously rescued from danger?
Okay.
Or is it more of a spiritual escape?
Correct.
A protection from the spiritual consequences of those trials?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
And there are different interpretations of this passage.
Okay.
Some believe it refers to a physical escape, while others see it as a spiritual escape.
So there's some ambiguity, some mystery surrounding those words.
There is. And I think it's important to approach this passage with humility and an open mind, recognizing that we might not have all the answers.
But regardless of how we interpret the specifics of that escape, the overall message seems clear.
Okay.
We need to be prepared both physically and spiritually. Yes.
For the challenges that lie ahead.
Absolutely. Jesus is calling us to live in a state of readiness.
Okay.
To be watchful, prayerful, and to trust in his provision and protection.
And that trust, that reliance on God, seems to be a key theme that runs throughout all of these sources we've been exploring.
It does.
Whether it's Daniel facing the lion's den, or the early Christians navigating the complexities of Roman culture, their faith sustained them.
It did.
Guided them, and ultimately empowered them to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Yes. And that faith, that trust in God, is not a passive acceptance of whatever life throws at us. It's an active engagement with the world, a willingness to stand up for what's right, and a commitment to living out our beliefs even in the face of opposition.
It's about being salt and light, as Jesus said.
Exactly.
It's about making a difference, about influencing the world for good, even in the midst of darkness and uncertainty. And that brings us back to the podcast host's assertion that the mark of the beast is not a physical symbol, but rather a spiritual choice to embrace sin.
His interpretation definitely challenges traditional views of the mark of the beast.
It does. He shifts the focus from an external symbol to an internal disposition, from something that's imposed on us to something that we choose.
He's saying that the real mark of the beast is a spiritual allegiance to sin.
Yes.
A rejection of God's authority and a willingness to embrace darkness.
And that's a powerful message because it reminds us that the battle isn't just out there in the world. It's also within each of us.
It's about the choices we make every day. The small compromises we make, the temptations we give in to.
It's like he's saying that the mark of the beast isn't something we should be afraid of in some distant future. It's something we need to be aware of right now in this moment.
And that awareness, that vigilance is crucial.
It is.
Because if we're not careful, we can easily slip into patterns of thinking and behavior
that lead us away from God and toward a path of destruction.
So how do we guard against that?
Yeah, how do we resist those subtle influences that can pull us away from God and toward a path of sin and darkness.
Well, the podcast host offers some intriguing insights on this, drawing parallels between the Israelites in the wilderness and our own struggles with temptation.
Right, those cravings.
He talks about the need for spiritual discernment.
Okay, discernment again.
The ability to recognize those subtle influences and make choices that align with our faith and values.
It's like he's saying that we need to develop a spiritual radar.
Yes.
Something that can detect those subtle dangers and help us navigate the complexities of our modern world.
That's a great analogy. And he connects this idea of spiritual discernment to some surprising examples.
Like what?
Like hip-hop music and Disney-themed weddings.
Wait, what? Hip-hop and Disney weddings?
I know, right?
How do those fit into all of this? He uses them to illustrate how even seemingly harmless cultural expressions can sometimes carry subtle messages that are contrary to biblical values.
So it's not about condemning those things outright.
Right.
It's about being discerning, about recognizing the messages being conveyed and making conscious choices about what we embrace.
Exactly. He's encouraging us to be critical consumers of culture. Not just passively absorbing whatever's being thrown at us, but actively evaluating it through the lens of our faith.
So we need to be aware of how culture can subtly shape our values and beliefs even without us realizing it.
Precisely. He's not advocating for a complete withdrawal from culture, but rather for a discerning engagement with it.
So we can still enjoy things.
We can. We can enjoy aspects of culture, but we should also be aware of the messages they're conveying. And how those messages might align with or conflict with our own beliefs.
That makes sense. It's about being thoughtful and intentional about the cultural influences we allow into our lives.
And that takes us to another intriguing YouTube video in your collection, titled, All Religions Come from Babylon.
This one again.
This one delves into the idea of cultural and religious influences that have shaped history. Even those that have touched Christianity itself.
This one's a bit controversial, isn't it?
It is.
It claims that a lot of religion practices and symbols can be traced back to ancient Babylon.
Including some elements of Christianity.
It even suggests that the Catholic Church intentionally created Islam to stop the spread of true Christianity.
Yeah, that's a pretty contentious claim.
Yeah, it is. And it's important to note that these claims are highly disputed.
Yes, they are.
And not universally accepted within scholarly circles.
But regardless of whether we agree with every detail, it's still fascinating to consider the historical interplay between different cultures and belief systems.
Yeah, how they kind of bounce off each other.
Exactly. This video highlights the complexity of religious history and how beliefs and practices have migrated and evolved across cultures and continents.
It's complicated.
It is. It reminds us that things are rarely as simple as they seem. And that there's always more to learn and explore.
So maybe it's not about accepting everything the video claims as absolute truth. But about using it as a springboard for further investigation.
I think that's a healthy approach.
Okay.
It's about being open to different perspectives, even challenging ones, and using them to deepen our own understanding of history, culture, and faith.
Makes you wonder about those hidden connections, the threads of influence that have woven their way through history, shaping the world we live in today.
And that brings us to another YouTube video. Genesis 9:11, Noah and Sons, the Tower of Babel.
Right, this one again.
Which also touches on the idea of cultural defiance against God. This one seems to draw a parallel between the Tower of Babel story and what it sees as a growing rejection of traditional religious values in modern society.
Like what kind of things?
Well, it points to things like the redefinition of marriage and the Sparkle Creed.
What's the Sparkle Creed?
That's a rewritten version of the Apostles' Creed. That embraces LGBTQ+ identities as evidence of a shift away from biblical principles.
So it's presenting a particular viewpoint.
Yes, it is.
One that sees these cultural changes as a form of rebellion against God's will.
Right. And while that perspective might resonate with some viewers, it's important to acknowledge that there are diverse viewpoints within Christianity on these issues.
Yeah, not all Christians would agree with that.
Exactly. Not all Christians interpret these cultural shifts in the same way. Some see them as positive developments, while others view them with concern.
So a variety of different opinions.
Exactly. And it's important for us as viewers and listeners to engage with these topics thoughtfully and to form our own conclusions based on our understanding of Scripture and our personal convictions.
So we've got this fascinating mix of sources.
We do.
each offering a different perspective on these themes of human ambition, cultural influence, and the choices we make.
It's like we're starting to piece together a puzzle.
Okay.
But some of the pieces are still missing.
Right, and maybe that's the point.
Maybe it is. Maybe this deep dive isn't about finding all the answers.
Okay.
But about asking the right questions. About exploring the complexities and nuances of these ancient and modern sources.
Right.
And about discovering how they might speak to our own lives and challenges.
I like that. It's about embracing the mystery, the unanswered questions, and that ongoing search for truth.
And that search often leads us down unexpected paths.
Oh, boy.
We've explored the Tower of Babel, the symbolism of Babylon, and Daniel's journey of faith in exile.
Right.
But what about those specific excerpts in the book of Daniel that you mentioned? What insights can we glean from them?
Well, let's delve into those details.
Okay.
They offer a fascinating glimpse into Daniel's character and his ability to kind of navigate those complexities of living in a foreign culture.
Yeah, walking that tightrope between assimilation and maintaining his own identity.
Right. How did he do it?
Sounds like we're about to uncover some more hidden treasures in this deep dive.
Let's see what we can find. So we've been talking about this idea of discernment, this ability to navigate kind of the complexities of culture and make choices that align with our faith.
Right. It's like trying to find that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Between engaging with the world and staying true to our values.
Exactly. And the podcast host actually offers some pretty practical advice on how to cultivate that discernment.
So how do we do it?
Well, he talks about the importance of immersing ourselves in Scripture.
Okay.
Of really, getting to know God's Word so we can recognize when something is out of alignment with it.
But the Bible's like our compass.
Yeah, exactly.
Guiding us through those twists and turns of life.
Yeah, right. And he also emphasizes the importance of prayer, specifically praying for discernment.
Makes sense. We can't do this on our own.
Right.
We need God's help to see things clearly, to understand his will for our lives.
Absolutely. And he makes another point that really resonated with me.
Okay, what's that?
The importance of community.
Oh, yeah. We need each other.
We do.
We need fellow believers to encourage us, challenge us, and help us stay on track.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron.
Right.
We need those relationships to help us grow and mature in our faith.
And to provide that accountability, that support system that helps us stay grounded when the world tries to pull us off course.
Okay, so we've got Scripture, prayer, and community.
Those are three powerful tools.
Yeah, there.
For cultivating discernment.
But there's one more element that he emphasizes.
Okay, what's that?
The need for self-reflection.
What do you mean by that?
He's talking about being honest with ourselves.
Okay.
About taking an honest look at our own hearts.
And identifying any areas where we might be susceptible to compromise or deception.
So recognizing our own weaknesses?
Yeah.
Those areas where we might be tempted to stray from God's path.
Exactly. We need to be willing to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Like what?
What am I truly seeking in life? What are my priorities? What values am I embracing?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, and if we discover that our hearts are not fully aligned with God's will, we need to be willing to repent and turn back to him.
Repentance is not a one-time event.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, a daily turning away from sin and toward God.
So cultivating spiritual discernment is a journey, not a destination?
Precisely. It's a lifelong pursuit
Okay.
that requires diligence, humility, and a willingness to submit our hearts and minds to God's transforming power.
Okay, so we've explored some practical steps for developing discernment.
We have.
But I'm still kind of curious about how all of this connects to the bigger picture.
To those overarching themes of human ambition, cultural influence, and the choices we make.
I think the key lies in recognizing that these themes are all interconnected.
Okay.
Our ambitions, the cultures we inhabit, and the choices we make are all threads in a complex tapestry that forms our lives.
So it's not about compartmentalizing these things.
Right.
It's about seeing how they all fit together.
Exactly. Our ambitions can either drive us toward God or away from him. The cultures we inhabit can either support our faith or undermine it.
Okay.
And the choices we make can either lead us toward righteousness or towards sin.
So it's all about alignment.
Alignment.
Aligning our ambitions with God's purposes.
Right.
Discerning the cultural influences that shape our thinking.
Yeah.
And making choices that reflect our commitment to Christ.
Precisely. It's about living lives of intentionality, purpose, and integrity.
That's a powerful vision, but where do we even begin?
I believe the first step is surrender.
Surrender.
Yes, surrender. We need to surrender our hearts to God, to acknowledge that he is the Lord of our lives.
So letting go of our own
needed.
ambitions, our own agendas, and submitting ourselves fully to God's will.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we are not in control. God is.
And once we've surrendered to God, what then?
Then we can begin to seek his guidance in every area of our lives.
Okay.
We can ask him to direct our ambitions, to help us discern truth from error, and to give us the strength to make wise choices.
So surrender is not about passivity,
Right.
but about actively seeking God's will.
Yes.
And aligning our lives with his purposes.
Exactly. It's about living in a state of constant dependence on him.
Okay.
Trusting that he will lead us and guide us every step of the way.
That's a beautiful picture.
It is. And it's a picture that's available to all who believe.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to encourage you to take that first step of surrender.
Yeah.
To open your heart to God, to seek his guidance, and to begin the journey of aligning your life with his will.
Remember, you are not alone in this journey.
Right. Yeah.
We have a God who loves us, who guides us, and who empowers us to live lives that are pleasing to him.
And as we navigate this complex world with all its challenges and temptations,
Yeah.
let's remember the lessons we've gleaned from these sources.
Okay.
That cautionary tale of the Tower of Babel, the inspiring example of Daniel's faithfulness,
Right.
and the profound teachings of Jesus that call us to a life of humility, service, and discernment.
Let's be mindful of the influences that shape our thinking, and let's make choices that reflect our commitment to Christ.
And above all, let's trust in God's guidance and provision as we seek to live lives of purpose, integrity, and impact.
This deep dive has been a fascinating exploration of ancient wisdom and modern challenges.
It has.
And it's left us with some profound questions to ponder and some practical steps to take as we continue our own journeys of faith.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth.